The Rosewood Orphanage sat on the edge of a small town, nestled among vast rolling hills and dense woods. Despite its peaceful surroundings, the orphanage carried the sorrowful stories of the children who lived within its walls. Many were like Liam, a boy who had been orphaned at just 6 years old when a tragic car accident took the lives of his parents. Liam had been found in the wreckage, clutching a tattered stuffed toy, his small face streaked with tears. The memory of that day had faded over the years, but the pain of losing his family never truly left him. Elena was different. Abandoned by her parents as a baby, she had known nothing of the outside world beyond Rosewood's gates. Her only sense of family came from the other orphans, especially Liam. From the moment they met, they formed an unbreakable bond. Liam, 2 years older than Elena, took on the role of her protector. They spent countless hours in the orphanage garden, their favorite spot, dreaming of a future where they both find happiness. Elena would often sit by the old oak tree, weaving small daisy chains while Liam spoke of a world beyond the orphanage. In his stories, they were never separated, always together, facing whatever challenges life threw at them. Though their world was limited to the boundaries of the orphanage, their imaginations knew no limits. Every evening, after the sun dipped below the horizon, they would sneak out to the garden and gaze at the stars, making silent wishes on the brightest ones. One day, on Elena's 7th birthday, she and Liam crafted identical bracelets from the materials they had, simple leather cords with small charms they had collected. "These will remind us of each other," Liam said with a shy smile. "Even if one of us leaves, we'll always have these to remember." Elena had nodded solemnly, gripping the bracelet as if it were a lifeline. Neither of them knew how prophetic those words would be. Liam's life changed forever on a warm, sunny afternoon. The Kingstons, a wealthy couple, had arrived at Rosewood Orphanage in search of a child to adopt. Robert Kingston was a respected businessman, and his wife, Vivian, was known for her philanthropy. They had no children of their own, despite years of trying, and had decided to adopt a boy to carry on the Kingston legacy. The Kingstons were instantly drawn to Liam. His intelligence, politeness, and quiet strength impressed them. The couple's decision was made quickly. They would take Liam into their home. However, for Liam, the joy of being chosen was bittersweet. He had always dreamed of having a family, but the thought of leaving Elena behind filled him with dread. She was his only friend, his confidant, and his anchor in a world of uncertainty. On the day of his departure, the orphanage held a small farewell ceremony for Liam. The other children clapped and smiled, but only Elena's face reflected the deep sadness in his own heart. As he packed his few belongings, including the bracelet Elena had made for him, he found her waiting for him by the oak tree, the same spot where they had shared so many of their dreams. Tears filled her eyes, but she forced a smile, clutching her own bracelet tightly. "I'll miss you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I'll miss you too," Liam replied, his voice thick with emotion, "but I'll come back for you, I promise." They embraced, holding each other tightly as though letting go would break them apart forever. With one last lingering look, Liam was whisked away in the Kingston's sleek black car. As the car pulled out of the orphanage's gates, Elena stood frozen, her hand on her bracelet, watching until Liam disappeared from sight. She had never felt so alone. Liam's new life in the city was a world away from the simplicity of the orphanage. The Kingston estate was a sprawling mansion situated in the wealthiest district of the city, surrounded by manicured gardens, tall gates, and a staff of servants who catered to every need. Liam had his own bedroom, larger than any room he had ever seen at Rosewood, filled with toys, books, and everything a young boy could want. Yet, despite the opulence, something was missing. Robert and Vivian were kind, but they were also distant. Their lives revolved around social events, charity galas, and maintaining their status in high society. Though they provided for Liam, they rarely spent quality time with him. He quickly learned the expectations that came with being a Kingston. Excellence in all things, from his education to his behavior. Private tutors were hired to ensure Liam excelled academically, and he was enrolled in prestigious schools where he was expected to outshine his peers. Liam adapted to his new surroundings, but a sense of loneliness gnawed at him. He missed Elena terribly. At night, when the house was quiet, he would sit by his bedroom window, looking out at the city lights, clutching the bracelet she had given him. He wondered what she was doing, whether she was happy, and if she still thought about him. His new world was full of luxury, but he longed for the simple companionship he had shared with her. Vivian, ever mindful of appearances, encouraged Liam to focus on his future. "You are a Kingston now," she often reminded him. "You must uphold the family's legacy." But Liam didn't care about the legacy. His thoughts were always of Elena and the promise he had made to come back for her. Meanwhile, back at Rosewood, Elena struggled with the emptiness Liam's absence left behind. The orphanage, once a place filled with adventure and companionship, now felt cold and lonely. The days dragged on, and every corner of Rosewood reminded her of him. The garden where they had played, the oak tree where they had shared their dreams. Everywhere she looked, Liam's memory haunted her. But life moved on, and so did Elena. A year after Liam's adoption, she was also given a chance at a new life. Daniel and Marie Stone, a couple who owned a small but struggling business, adopted her. Though they were not wealthy like the Kingstons, they were kind and loving, providing Elena with the warmth and affection she had longed for since childhood. The Stones treated Elena as their own daughter, nurturing her talents and encouraging her to pursue her ambitions. As she grew, Elena showed an extraordinary talent for business. She worked alongside Daniel, learning the intricacies of running the company. Her keen insights and innovative ideas breathed new life into the struggling business, and by the time she graduated from university, Elena had taken over as CEO, determined to turn the family business into a success. The once small, struggling company flourished under Elena's leadership. She built a reputation as a fierce and brilliant executive, known for her sharp decision-making and no-nonsense approach. However, despite her professional success, there was always a part of her that felt incomplete. The bracelet she still wore was a constant reminder of the promise she and Liam had made as children, and though she had long accepted that they might never meet again, she could never bring herself to remove it. Years had passed since Liam and Elena left the Rosewood orphanage. Their lives, once intertwined by shared memories and a deep bond, now existed worlds apart. Liam, under the mentorship of his adoptive parents, had become a formidable businessman, heading Kingston Enterprises, a multi-billion-dollar corporation that dealt in real estate, technology, and finance. His name was synonymous with power, ambition, and ruthless success. His childhood idealism had long since faded, replaced by a hardened exterior built by the harsh realities of the business world. Elena, too, had climbed the corporate ladder, though her rise was fueled by passion and a fierce determination to prove herself. Under her leadership, Stone Industries, the company once on the brink of collapse, had grown into a competitive player in the market, focusing on eco-friendly innovations in manufacturing. Her reputation as a tough and brilliant CEO made her one of the youngest and most influential women in the industry. Their companies, though operating in different sectors, found themselves at odds over a major government contract that would revolutionize the business landscape. Both Liam and Elena's companies had placed bids for a project to develop a cutting-edge technological hub, an initiative that would dominate the market for decades to come. The stakes were high, and neither CEO was willing to back down. The first time they met, neither recognized the other. In a grand conference room at the Global Business Summit, both CEOs had been invited to present their respective proposals to a group of key investors. Elena arrived first, her expression steely, wearing her trademark sharp black suit and a confidence that unnerved most people. When Liam entered moments later, their eyes locked briefly. For a fleeting second, something felt familiar, but neither could place it. The years and the walls they had built around themselves had erased the innocent faces they once knew. Their first interaction was far from friendly. As Liam presented his proposal, Elena picked apart his arguments with precision, pointing out weaknesses in his strategy that no one else had dared to mention. Liam, used to dominating such discussions, was both surprised and irritated by her audacity. Their clash was intense, and by the end of the meeting, the tension between them was palpable. It was clear they were now enemies. What had begun as a business rivalry soon evolved into a full-scale corporate war. Every move Liam made, Elena countered with an equally strategic one. The government contract became a symbol of their personal battle for dominance, and both CEOs threw everything they had into winning. Boardroom negotiations became battlegrounds, with neither party willing to show even the slightest sign of weakness. Outside of the boardroom, rumors of their rivalry spread quickly through the business world. Industry insiders speculated about the tension between the two powerful leaders. Some said they were too alike, both fiercely ambitious, both uncompromising. Others speculated that there was something personal behind their feud, though neither Liam nor Elena gave any indication of a deeper connection. Despite their animosity, something about Elena intrigued Liam. There was a spark in her eyes, a fire that reminded him of something he couldn't quite place. It wasn't just her intelligence or her determination. There was a familiarity, a sense that they had met before. But he pushed those thoughts aside, focusing instead on how to outmaneuver her. Elena, on the other hand, couldn't stand Liam. To her, he represented everything she despised about the corporate world: cold, calculating, and willing to do whatever it took to win. She saw him as the embodiment of greed, a man who had likely never known struggle or loss. Yet, despite her disdain, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to him than met the eye. Something about him made her uneasy, though she couldn't pinpoint why. Their interactions grew colder by the day. Emails were curt and to the point. Public appearances were marked by thinly veiled insults and competitive jabs. And yet, underneath the icy exterior, both felt something stirring, something long buried and forgotten. One day, during yet another contentious business negotiation, the tension between Liam and Elena reached a new high. The meeting, held in the sleek, glass-walled offices of Stone Industries, was supposed to finalize details on a shared project both companies were reluctantly involved in, but the negotiations quickly devolved into a heated argument. Frustrated with Liam's refusal to compromise, Elena abruptly stood up, signaling the end of the meeting. "This is pointless," she muttered under her breath, turning on her heel and marching out of the room. As she stormed down the long hallway, her thoughts racing, she felt a sudden tug on her wrist. Unbeknownst to her, the clasp of her bracelet had loosened. The bracelet, the same one Liam had given her all those years ago at the orphanage, slipped off her wrist and fell to the ground. Liam, who had followed moments later, bent down to pick up the bracelet. The moment his fingers touched the worn leather, rush of memories hit him like a tidal wave. He turned the bracelet over in his hands, studying the small charm attached to it. It was impossible. It couldn't be. But the bracelet was unmistakable. His mind raced back to the orphanage, to Elena, to the promise they had made as children. For a few seconds, he stood frozen, staring at the bracelet in disbelief. How could this be? Could the fierce CEO he had been clashing with for months really be the same girl he had once considered his best friend? The girl who had given him the other half of this very bracelet? His heart pounded in his chest as the realization began to sink in. Without thinking, Liam pocketed the bracelet. He needed time to process what he had just discovered. Over the next few days, Liam couldn't stop thinking about the bracelet. He spent hours in his office, turning it over in his hands, trying to make sense of the situation. The more he thought about it, the more he was convinced that Elena was indeed the girl from the orphanage. But how could she not remember him? Did she know and was hiding it? Or had she truly forgotten? Determined to find answers, Liam began his investigation. He reached out to old contacts at Rosewood Orphanage, digging through adoption records and speaking to staff who had worked there during his time. He learned that shortly after he was adopted, a young girl named Elena had also left the orphanage, adopted by a family who ran a small business. As he connected the dots, everything fell into place. Elena Stone, the CEO of Stone Industries, was the same Elena who had been his closest friend at Rosewood. The revelation left him reeling. Memories flooded back of their games in the garden, their whispered dreams under the stars, the way she had hugged him so tightly on the day he left. He had thought of her often over the years, but life had gotten in the way. Now, she was back in his life, but not as a friend. Instead, they were enemies, locked in a bitter rivalry neither of them seemed willing to end. But now that he knew the truth, Liam's feelings toward Elena began to shift. He couldn't see her the same way anymore. She wasn't just a competitor. She was Elena, the girl who had meant everything to him once. And now that he had found her again, he wasn't sure what to do. Armed with the knowledge of their shared past, Liam's approach toward Elena changed, though he didn't reveal his discovery just yet. In board meetings and negotiations, his tone softened, his previously sharp retorts tempered by an underlying warmth. Elena, used to their combative interactions, noticed the shift immediately. It unsettled her. She couldn't understand why Liam's demeanor had changed so abruptly. Where once he had been cold and ruthless, now there was a strange tenderness in his eyes. His words, though still sharp in business matters, carried a different weight. It confused her, and confusion, she knew, was dangerous in the corporate world. She couldn't afford to be distracted by whatever mind games Liam was playing. Despite her best efforts to keep her guard up, Elena found herself watching Liam more closely during their meetings. She noticed things she hadn't before. The way his gaze lingered on her bracelet, the soft way he said her name, as though it meant something more than just another competitor. It frustrated her, but it also intrigued her. Liam, for his part, struggled to find the right moment to tell Elena the truth. He didn't want to shock her, and he wasn't sure how she would react. Would she be angry that he had kept the bracelet, or would she be relieved to finally know the truth? He didn't know, and that uncertainty kept him silent for the time being. Instead, he focused on trying to rebuild their relationship slowly, hoping that when the time came to reveal their past, she would be ready to hear it. For days, Liam struggled with whether or not to reveal the truth to Elena. Every time he looked at her, the memories of their childhood together came rushing back. He could still see the girl who had once been his best friend, the one who had crafted a bracelet for him and made him promise to never forget her. But this Elena, the CEO standing in front of him, cool and composed, seemed like a different person entirely. Yet, there were glimpses. When her guard was down, when she wasn't scrutinizing the details of a business contract or fighting to get ahead, Liam caught fleeting moments of vulnerability. The way her fingers absently played with her bracelet when she was deep in thought. The soft look in her eyes when she was lost in her own world. He couldn't help but wonder if she ever thought of their past, if she, too, held on to their promise. In a particularly intense board meeting, as they both argued over the final terms of a contract they were working on together, Liam decided he could no longer keep the truth from her. The tension in the room was thick, their voices raised as they debated back and forth, until, finally, Elena stood up and slammed her hands on the table, her frustration boiling over. "What's your problem, Liam? You've been acting strange for weeks." Liam's heart pounded in his chest as he gazed at her, the words lingering on the tip of his tongue. "Elena, But before he could continue, his phone buzzed, breaking the moment. It was an urgent call from one of his top investors. Reluctantly, he answered, and the opportunity to confess slipped away once again. The look on Elena's face as she stormed out of the room left Liam reeling with regret. That evening, Liam found himself alone in his penthouse apartment, the lights of the city twinkling beneath him. He couldn't shake the feeling that he had let another opportunity slip by. Why was it so hard to tell her the truth? He sat by the window, holding Elena's bracelet in his hands, tracing the familiar pattern with his fingers. He thought about the boy he used to be, the boy who had promised never to forget her, who had dreamed of a future where they would always be together. But that boy had changed. Life had turned him into someone else, someone colder, more calculating. And he had no idea if Elena would ever accept the man he had become. On the other side of the city, Elena sat in her office, working late into the night. But no matter how hard she tried to focus on the paperwork in front of her, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off with Liam. His behavior had been so erratic lately, and the way he looked at her, especially when she was wearing her bracelet, unsettled her. There was something he wasn't telling her, but she couldn't figure out what. As the night dragged on, Elena finally pushed her work aside and stood by her office window, gazing out at the skyline. Her fingers, as they so often did, drifted to the bracelet on her wrist. It had become such a part of her that she rarely even thought about it anymore. But tonight, as the weight of her rivalry with Liam pressed down on her, she found herself remembering the boy she had once known at the orphanage, the boy who had promised to come back for her. She shook her head, dismissing the thought. That boy was gone. Liam was not that boy anymore. A few days later, both Liam and Elena found themselves at the city's annual charity gala, an event that brought together the biggest names in business and politics. The event was held in a grand ballroom, with crystal chandeliers and tables adorned with the finest linens. Everyone who was anyone in the corporate world was there, dressed in their finest attire, networking and discussing the latest business deals. Liam arrived at the event with his usual confidence, though his mind was elsewhere. He knew Elena would be there, and he couldn't stop thinking about the moment he had missed again. As he entered the ballroom, scanning the room for her, he spotted her almost immediately. She was standing by one of the tables, speaking with several investors. Her presence was magnetic, her emerald green gown catching the light as she moved, and Liam couldn't take his eyes off her. He approached her cautiously, unsure of how she would react after their last meeting. "Elena," he said, his voice soft but steady. She turned to face him, her expression unreadable. "Liam," she replied coolly, "here to make another business proposition?" "No," he said, shaking his head. I want to talk. Really talk." For a moment, she hesitated. There was something different in his voice, something that made her pause. Reluctantly, she agreed, and they stepped out onto the balcony, leaving the noise of the party behind. The night air was cool and refreshing, and for a while, neither of them spoke. Liam stared out at the city lights, trying to gather the courage to finally tell her the truth. "I've been meaning to talk to you for a while now," he began. "There's something I need to tell you." Elena's brow furrowed, her guard still up. "What is it, Liam?" He turned to face her, his heart pounding. "Do you remember the orphanage? Rosewood?" Her eyes widened in shock, and for a moment, she said nothing. The name of the orphanage brought back a flood of memories she had long buried. How do you know about Rosewood?" she whispered. Liam took a deep breath and reached into his pocket, pulling out the bracelet she had lost. "Because, Elena, I was there too." The moment Liam held up the bracelet, time seemed to stop for Elena. She stared at it, her heart pounding in her chest, her mind racing to make sense of what she was seeing. That bracelet. It was the one she had given him all those years ago, the one she had thought was lost forever. Her fingers trembled as she reached out to take it, memories flooding her mind. "Liam, no. It can't be," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "You were your—" "Yes," Liam said, his voice gentle but filled with emotion. "It's me. I was the boy at the orphanage. The boy who promised to come back for you." Elena felt as though the ground had shifted beneath her feet. All this time, the man she had been clashing with, the man she had come to despise, was the same boy who had been her best friend, the one who had held her when she cried, the one who had promised to always be there for her. How could she have not known? "You're the boy who left," she said softly, tears welling up in her eyes. "You left, and you never came back." Liam's heart ached at the pain in her voice. "I tried to come back," he said, stepping closer. "But life got in the way. My parents, my adoptive parents, took me far away, and I didn't know how to find you. But I never forgot you, Elena. Not for a single day." Elena shook her head, her emotions swirling inside her. Part of her wanted to embrace him, to hold him like they used to, but another part of her was angry. Angry that he had stayed away for so long, that he had let their childhood bond fade into the past while they became enemies in the present. "I don't know what to say," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. Liam gently took her hand, his voice soft and filled with sincerity. "You don't have to say anything right now. I needed you to know the truth." The days following Liam's revelation were a whirlwind of emotions for both him and Elena. Elena, overwhelmed by the weight of their shared past, found it difficult to focus on her work. The bracelet, once a simple symbol of their childhood bond, now carried an entirely new significance. She wore it constantly, her fingers brushing against it absent-mindedly whenever she felt lost in thought. But even as her emotions stirred, Elena found herself questioning everything. How could they reconcile their past with the reality of their present? They were no longer children at the orphanage. They were adults, leaders of rival companies, caught in a fierce competition for dominance in the corporate world. Could they really go back to the way things were? Liam, on the other hand, was filled with a sense of hope. Now that the truth was out, he was determined to rebuild the connection they had lost. He sent her messages, asking to meet and talk more about their past, their future. But Elena, still grappling with her own feelings, kept her distance. She wasn't ready to confront the storm of emotions that Liam had stirred up inside her. At the same time, the business world continued to press on. Both Stone Industries and Kingston Enterprises were still in the running for the lucrative government contract, and the rivalry between the two companies showed no signs of easing. Elena and Liam found themselves face-to-face in meeting after meeting, their personal feelings bubbling just beneath the surface of their professional interactions. It was during one such meeting, where tensions were particularly high, that Elena finally snapped. "I can't do this, Liam," she said, standing abruptly from the conference table, her voice thick with frustration. "We can't keep pretending that nothing has changed." The room fell silent, all eyes on her. Liam, his own emotions barely in check, rose to follow her as she stormed out of the room. Outside in the hallway, he caught up to her, grabbing her arm gently. "Elena, wait, please." She turned to face him, tears brimming in her eyes. "What do you want from me, Liam?" she asked, her voice shaking. "What do you expect me to do?" Liam's heart raced as he faced her, the weight of their complicated relationship crashing down on him. "I don't know," he admitted softly. I want to fix things. I want us to have what we used to." Elena shook her head, her emotions spilling over. "But we're not those kids anymore, Liam. We've changed. Our lives have changed. We can't just go back to the way things were." Liam took a deep breath, his own frustration mounting. "I know that," he said, "but I can't just pretend that what we had doesn't matter. I've spent years thinking about you, about us, and now that I've found you again, I don't want to lose you." Elena wiped away a tear, her voice filled with pain. "And what if we're already lost, Liam? What if we can't find our way back?" For a long moment, neither of them spoke, the silence between them heavy and filled with unspoken words. Finally, Elena took a step back, her resolve hardening. "I need time," she said, her voice steady despite the turmoil in her heart. "I need time to figure out what I want." Liam nodded, though the ache in his chest deepened. "Take all the time you need," he said quietly. "I'll be here when you're ready." With that, Elena turned and walked away, leaving Liam standing in the hallway, his heart heavy but filled with a glimmer of hope. He knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but he was willing to fight for her, for them. Because no matter how much time had passed, and no matter how much they had changed, their bond, symbolized by the bracelets they still wore, was something worth fighting for. And Liam was determined not to let go. As Elena distanced herself from Liam, she couldn't shake the memories that had resurfaced. Her once well-ordered life, dominated by business strategies and corporate takeovers, was now disrupted by the flood of emotions she had tried so hard to bury. Night after night, her dreams were filled with images of their childhood. Her hand tightly clasped in his, their whispered promises, the laughter they shared under the trees at Rosewood Orphanage. And now, the man she had come to despise, the man she fought against in boardrooms, was the same boy who had once been her closest friend. Her work suffered. Colleagues and employees began to notice her distracted demeanor. She, who was usually razor-sharp and uncompromising, seemed lost in thought more often than not. The weight of her past and present pressed down on her like a heavy cloud, and she found herself avoiding the office whenever she could. Even simple tasks, like reviewing proposals or signing contracts, felt like monumental challenges. One evening, after yet another restless night, Elena drove to the park near the orphanage. It was a place she hadn't visited in years, but something inside her pulled her there. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of fall, and the leaves crunched beneath her feet as she wandered the park's paths. She found a secluded bench under a large oak tree, the very place where she and Liam had often sat together as children, dreaming of the future. Sitting there now, the memories were almost too much to bear. She clutched the bracelet on her wrist, the tangible reminder of their shared past, and tears welled up in her eyes. She had always thought that chapter of her life was closed, but now, with Liam back in her life, it felt as though the wound had been reopened, raw and painful. Could they really reconcile the past with who they had become? While Elena was caught in an emotional whirlwind, Liam's determination only grew stronger. After their last confrontation, he understood that Elena needed space, but every fiber of his being screamed at him to make things right. He knew it would take more than words. It would take action, patience, and above all, trust. Liam threw himself into finding ways to show Elena he was serious about their connection. He started with small gestures, sending her thoughtful messages, a bouquet of roses with a simple note that read, "Thinking of you, always," and even discreetly sending donations to the orphanage they both once called home. But none of it seemed to break through the wall she had built around her heart. Determined to give her time, he focused on their business dealings, ensuring he didn't undermine her position at Kingston Enterprises. But even there, he couldn't help but seek moments where he could remind her that their bond was real. In a key negotiation meeting with a third-party contractor, Liam and Elena were on opposite sides of the table, fiercely advocating for their respective companies. But when the meeting ended, as the room cleared out, Liam caught her eyes for just a moment, and in that glance, he saw the same vulnerability he had seen in their youth. "Elena," he called softly as she packed up her things. She hesitated, then turned. "What is it, Liam?" "Please, just give me a chance to explain everything. Not as business rivals, but as us." Elena's gaze softened for the briefest moment before hardening again. "I can't, Liam. Not right now. I need to figure this out on my own." Liam watched as she walked away again, and though frustration gnawed at him, he knew he had to be patient. Pushing her would only drive her further away. Days turned into weeks, and the tension between Elena and Liam continued to simmer beneath the surface. Neither could focus fully on their business dealings, and it was beginning to take a toll. Their shared history now overshadowed every interaction, every negotiation, and their once clear-cut rivalry grew more complicated by the day. Kingston Enterprises and Stone Industries were locked in a battle over a crucial partnership with a tech conglomerate, and the stakes couldn't have been higher. Elena and Liam were forced to attend an exclusive business retreat, a week-long event designed to foster collaboration between competing companies. The retreat was held at a secluded luxury resort nestled in the mountains, far from the distractions of the city. On the first night, an awkward silence settled over them as they found themselves seated next to each other during dinner. The air between them was thick with unresolved tension, and every glance, every movement, seemed charged with unspoken words. After dinner, there was a bonfire on the resort's terrace. Elena, feeling suffocated by the proximity to Liam, slipped away from the crowd and wandered toward the edge of the property, where a small garden overlooked the mountains. She stood there, gazing out at the dark, starry sky, the wind tugging at her hair. For the first time in days, she felt a sense of peace. But then she heard footsteps approaching and knew, without turning around, that it was Liam. "Elena," he said softly, stopping a few feet behind her. "I can't keep pretending that this doesn't matter. That we don't matter." She didn't reply immediately, her gaze still fixed on the stars. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Liam, I don't know how to deal with this. Everything is so complicated." He stepped closer, his voice filled with raw honesty. "It doesn't have to be. I know we're different people now, but what we had, it still means something, doesn't it?" Elena's heart raced, and for the first time, she let herself confront the truth she had been avoiding. "Yes," she whispered, turning to face him. "It means everything." After that night, something shifted between them. While their professional rivalry remained, There was now an underlying current of understanding, a shared acknowledgement that their connection was too strong to ignore. But rebuilding trust, after years of distance and misunderstanding, wasn't easy. Elena, still unsure of how to navigate her emotions, suggested they take things slowly. "We can't just dive back into the past, Liam. We need to find out if we can be friends, real friends, before anything else." Liam agreed, though his heart yearned for more. "Whatever you need, Elena. I'll wait for as long as it takes." They started spending more time together outside of work, small moments where they could simply be themselves. They took walks in the park, visited the orphanage to see how it had changed, and even had lunch together, where they shared stories about their lives after the orphanage. Elena opened up about the pressures of being a CEO, and Liam confessed the loneliness he often felt despite his success. These moments of vulnerability brought them closer, and slowly but surely, the walls Elena had built around her heart began to crumble. But while their personal relationship was improving, the business world continued to press down on them, threatening to pull them apart. Just as things were starting to settle, a major crisis hit both Stone Industries and Kingston Enterprises. The tech conglomerate they had both been vying for pulled out of the deal at the last minute, citing concerns about their rivalry. The news sent shockwaves through both companies, with investors pulling back and share prices plummeting. Elena, who had worked tirelessly to secure the deal, was devastated. She retreated to her office, overwhelmed by the sense of failure, and for the first time in a long time, she felt completely lost. Liam, equally affected, went to find her. When he arrived at her office, he found her sitting at her desk, staring blankly at her computer screen. "Elena," he said softly, stepping inside, "we'll figure this out." But Elena didn't look at him. "This is all my fault," she whispered, her voice filled with guilt. "I pushed too hard, tried too hard to beat you, and now we've both lost everything." Liam crossed the room and knelt beside her chair, gently taking her hand in his. "Hey, we're in this together. We'll find a way through this. Together." For a moment, she simply stared at him, her eyes filled with uncertainty. But then, something in her softened, and she nodded. "Together," she whispered, gripping his hand tightly. In the aftermath of the crisis, Liam and Elena decided to take a bold step. Instead of continuing their rivalry, they proposed a collaboration between their companies, a merger of sorts, designed to strengthen both businesses and present a united front to their competitors. It was a risky move, one that would require a great deal of trust, but they were both willing to take that chance. Their teams were shocked by the sudden change in strategy, but as the plans for the collaboration took shape, it became clear that this was the right move. Slowly but surely, their companies began to recover, and the crisis that had once threatened to tear them apart became the catalyst for their unity. But even as they worked together professionally, Liam and Elena knew that their personal relationship still had a long way to go. Trust, once broken, was hard to rebuild, but every day they took small steps toward healing. Steps that brought them closer to the love they had once shared as children, and the love they were beginning to rediscover as adults. As Kingston Enterprises and Stone Industries moved forward with their collaboration, the change in dynamic between Liam and Elena became increasingly evident to everyone around them. What had once been an intense rivalry was now a partnership built on mutual respect and a growing personal bond. Yet, despite their professional success, both Liam and Elena continued to tiptoe around the deeper feelings they had for each other. It was during a late-night work session at Liam's office that the tension finally became too much to ignore. The two had been poring over merger documents for hours, the atmosphere relaxed but charged with unspoken emotion. As they worked, Elena's fingers absent-mindedly played with the bracelet she still wore, the one that had reconnected them after all these years. Liam noticed and couldn't help but smile. "You still wear it," he said softly, breaking the silence. Elena glanced at him, then down at the bracelet. "Of course. It's the one thing that's always reminded me of where I came from, of what really matters." Liam set down his pen and leaned back in his chair, his eyes never leaving her. "And what about us, Elena? Do we still matter?" She hesitated, her heart racing. They had been skirting around this conversation for weeks, and now it was right in front of her, impossible to ignore. Liam, I don't know. I don't know what we are anymore. We're still us, he said, his voice steady and sure. Maybe we've changed. Maybe life has made us harder, but deep down, we're still those kids who looked out for each other, who believed in each other. Elena felt a lump form in her throat. But we're also business partners now. And if this goes wrong, if we go wrong, it could ruin everything we've worked for. Liam stood up and walked over to her, kneeling beside her chair just as he had that day in her office. I'm willing to take that risk, Elena, because losing you again, that's not something I'm willing to go through. Her breath caught in her throat as his words hit her. She knew he meant it, and deep down, she felt the same. But the fear of being hurt again, of losing everything, kept her guarded. I need time, she whispered, echoing the words she had spoken weeks earlier. I'm not ready to jump into this. Liam nodded, his expression soft but determined. I'll wait as long as you need. Just promise me one thing. What? Don't shut me out. Elena's heart softened, and she gave him a small, hesitant smile. I promise. As weeks turned into months, Liam and Elena continued their cautious dance. They worked side by side, their relationship shifting from tentative to comfortable, yet the deeper feelings between them remained unspoken. For the first time in years, they felt like they could truly rely on each other, and it showed in both their personal and professional lives. But as their company's collaboration gained momentum, an unexpected challenge arose. A rival conglomerate, jealous of their success and eager to capitalize on any perceived weakness, launched a hostile takeover attempt on both Kingston Enterprises and Stone Industries. It was a coordinated attack, designed to exploit any cracks in their partnership. News of the attempted takeover spread like wildfire through the business world, and both companies' stock prices took a nosedive. Investors were panicking, and the board members of both firms were demanding answers. Elena was furious, but she kept her cool in front of her employees. We won't let them win, she told her board with confidence. We've worked too hard to let this happen. But privately, she was worried. The takeover was a real threat, and she knew that if they weren't careful, everything they had built could crumble. Liam, too, was feeling the pressure. He had spent years building Stone Industries from the ground up, and the thought of losing it all because of corporate greed was infuriating. But more than that, he was worried about Elena. He knew how much this partnership meant to her, and he didn't want to see her dreams shattered. Determined to fight back, they worked together to devise a plan to fend off the takeover. It wasn't easy. Every step was met with resistance, every move scrutinized by the media, but together, they stood strong. Their bond, once forged in childhood innocence, had now evolved into something deeper, something that could withstand even the harshest of challenges. As the battle against the hostile takeover raged on, Liam and Elena found themselves spending even more time together, their professional lives more intertwined than ever. Late nights in the office became the norm, and during those quiet hours, they found themselves talking, not just about work, but about life, their past, and the dreams they had for the future. It was during one of these late nights, as they sat in Liam's office overlooking the city, that a long-buried truth came to light. I've been thinking a lot about the orphanage lately, Liam said, his voice low and thoughtful. About the orphanage lately, Liam said, his voice low and thoughtful. About the day I was adopted. Elena looked up from her laptop, surprised by the sudden shift in conversation. What about it? Liam leaned back in his chair, his eyes distant. I never told you this, but the day I left, I didn't want to go. Elena's heart skipped a beat. She had always assumed he had been happy to be adopted, to leave the orphanage behind. What do you mean? I begged my adoptive parents to let me stay. I didn't care about the money or the fancy house. All I cared about was staying with you. Elena's breath caught in her throat. She had never known that. She had spent so many years believing that Liam had moved on without a second thought, while she had been left behind, alone. But why didn't you say anything? She whispered, her voice trembling. Liam looked at her, his expression filled with regret. "I was just a kid. I didn't know how to fight for what I wanted. And by the time I realized what I had lost, it was too late." Tears welled up in Elena's eyes. All these years, she had blamed him for leaving, for abandoning her. But now, hearing the truth, she realized that he had been just as lost as she had been. "I'm so sorry, Elena," Liam said, his voice thick with emotion. "I never wanted to hurt you. I just didn't know how to find my way back." Elena wiped away a tear, her heart aching for the boy Liam had been, and for the pain they had both carried for so long. "I'm sorry too," she said softly, "for thinking you didn't care." They sat in silence for a long moment, the weight of the past settling between them. But this time, it wasn't a burden, it was a release. They had finally spoken the words they had both needed to hear, and in doing so, they had begun to heal. With their personal relationship on the mend, Liam and Elena turned their full attention to the business crisis at hand. The hostile takeover had reached its peak, and it was clear that the rival conglomerate wasn't going to back down without a fight. In a last-ditch effort to save their companies, Liam and Elena decided to hold a joint press conference where they would publicly announce their plan to merge their businesses. It was a risky move, one that could either save them or destroy everything. The day of the press conference arrived, and the tension was palpable. The media had gathered in droves, eager to hear what the two CEOs had to say. As Liam and Elena stood side by side, facing the cameras, they exchanged a glance, one filled with determination and trust. "We stand here today not as rivals," Elena began, her voice strong and confident, "but as partners. Together, we have built something powerful, something worth fighting for." Liam stepped forward, his gaze unwavering. "We have faced many challenges, but through it all, we have remained united. Today, we are announcing the merger of Kingston Enterprises and Stone Industries, creating a new powerhouse in the business world." The room erupted in applause, and as the media swarmed them with questions, Liam and Elena knew they had won. Their companies were safe, their futures secure. But more than that, they had found each other again. In the weeks that followed the press conference, Liam and Elena's lives began to settle into a new rhythm. Their companies, now merged, were thriving, and the hostile takeover was nothing but a distant memory. But more importantly, their personal relationship had blossomed into something beautiful. One evening, as they sat together in Elena's office, watching the sunset over the city, Liam turned to her with a smile. "We did it." Elena smiled back, her heart full. "Yeah, we really did." Liam reached out and took her hand, his thumb gently brushing the bracelet she still wore. "Do you think maybe it's time for a new beginning?" Elena looked at him, her heart racing. She knew what he was asking, and for the first time in a long time, she felt ready to answer. "Yes," she said softly, "I think it's time." As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm golden light over them, Liam leaned in and kissed her, their past finally behind them, and their future stretching out before them, filled with hope, love, and the promise of a new beginning. Thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed the story. Please don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe for more delightful stories.